My name is OPZ. Today I am going to show you how to spice up your patterns with variations using punch-in effects and step components. We are going to look at every single punch-in effect and every single step component, which is quite a lot. So let's not waste any more time on this uninspired intro and dive right into it. We are going to start with the punch-in effects. These effects are great for performing live as they are applied immediately to your sound. Let's find out how this works. First, choose one of your patterns. Oh my god, that tune is so hot it makes my circuits melt. To apply punch-in effects now, first select one of your percussion or instrument tracks. You should probably mute all other tracks now for demonstration purposes so that you can hear the punch-in effect clearly. You can now apply a punch-in effect by holding the Shift button and pressing a keyboard button. If you press one of the keys in the low octave, the effects will only be applied to the currently selected track. The first one on the F key is a duck effect. It mutes the currently selected track as long as you hold the button, which will in this case result in silence. Yeah, that is a nice effect. Wow, I love that sound. Could listen to it all night. On F sharp you can apply a nice little filter sweep. It's quite useful to give your sound a little variation from time to time. On G is the first of two different loop effects. It sounds a little loud and over the top, but you can create a cool fill by combining it with the filter sweep. G sharp will add a stereo effect. It constantly changes the panning, which means your sound will kind of swing between left and right. This effect might seem a little useless since you are able to use an LFO to control the panning. But again, try to combine it with other punch-in effects like the filter sweep and the second loop, which is on the A key. There you go. That sound is heavy. On B flat you will find a simple pitch effect. Nothing special, but again useful to add variations to your sound. On B is a weird effect which is called follow. It aligns the steps of the other tracks in the percussion section with the currently selected. Try it to hear what it sounds like. On C is a ramp up effect. If you hold it, the pitch of your track will slowly increase with every bar. On C sharp is a short effect. It clips the samples, resulting in a kind of thin sound. On D is a ramp down effect, which does the opposite of the ramp up effect. It slowly decreases the pitch. The D sharp key is a long effect. It increases the attack time of the sample, resulting in something like a small fade-in sound. And the last punch-in effect on the E key is a randomizer effect. It replaces the samples you have selected with random sounds from the current sample bank. This is a great effect for jamming and to come up with new ideas, since it is quite unpredictable what it is going to sound like. So these are the punch-in effects for the currently selected track. But you can also apply effects to the whole track group by using the buttons of the higher octave on the keyboard. Let's take a quick look at them. First, unmute the other tracks of the drum group. You can now apply the punch-in effects just as you did in the lower octave. The effects are mostly the same with three exceptions. Instead of the follow effect on B is an echo. If you hold it, a short part of your pattern will be repeated while decreasing and increasing in loudness. Instead of ramp up on C and ramp down on D, there are two different fill types you can apply to your pattern. The first one is a more snare and kick-based fill. The second one more of a hi-hat thing. Now you know all my punch-in effects. If you love them so much that you want them to be applied permanently, you can even record them. Just hold the record button while you punch in your effects. Yes, just like this. If you are not satisfied with your recording, you can fully edit the punch-in effect just like any other step on any other track. To do that, select the performance track. The punch-in effect that you just recorded is saved in this track as a usual step and can be altered in the same way. While the performance track is active, you can use the keyboard buttons to apply punch-in effects without holding the shift button. The lower octave will now apply effects to the whole drum group and the upper octave to the synth group. Bring back your muted tracks and start jamming with the punch-in effects. Absolutely amazing. Punch-in effects are perfect for live performances and for jamming around. But if you are looking for a more controlled way to bring in variations, you might rather like step components. Let's have a look at them. First, let's create a new pattern quickly. Swell. To apply step components, now first select a track that you want to be affected. Now press and hold the shift button and select a step. The blinking green light indicates that you can now enter step components. You will now have to select a step component from the white key buttons as well as a value from the black key buttons. Press the first white key button to the left to apply a pulse component. What the pulse component does is retrigger the step. For example, if you select the value 3, the selected step will be played back 3 times, causing some kind of stutter. Note that this has a significant effect on the length of the sequence. For each time a note is retriggered, a step is inserted. So in this case your sequence is actually 2 steps longer than 16. This causes a permanent shifting of your hi-hat pattern, which can be quite nice. The value keys indicate how often the step will be played back before proceeding to the next step. If you select 0, the step will be retriggered a random amount of times. The next step component is called pulse hold and is quite the same as pulse. The only difference here is that the affected step will not be retriggered but held for the selected amount of steps. Apart from that, it behaves exactly as the first step component. The next one is called multiply, and it also retriggers a sound but in the same step and without adding new steps to the sequence. If you are working in a one-bar sequence, this might sound a little weird. So maybe this might be more fitting for longer sequences. Value keys 1 to 8 set the number of playbacks. Number 0 quantizes a step. Number 9 breaks a chord into its single notes, resulting in a small arpeggio. With the next step component, you can set the velocity for each step. Number 5 is your default value. The numbers below will set the velocity down, resulting in lower volume. Numbers 6 to 8 will increase the velocity. Number 9 will mute the selected step, and 0 will again pick a random value from 1 to 9. You might ask yourself now, why would I choose to use a step component to mute a step rather than just simply delete it? The answer is yes. The next step component is the ramp-up effect. It transposes a step every time it is triggered. For example, if you set this value to 3, it will increase the pitch of the step for 4 bars every time it is triggered until it is exactly 1 octave above the original pitch. However, if you apply this step component to more steps, this will affect the whole sequence as one, not the single steps. This is a cool way to come up with new melodies based on your input. The next step component is called ramp down, and surprise is the opposite of the ramp up thing. Instead of raising the pitch, the step is triggered 1 or 3 octaves above the original value and then decreases for the selected amount of steps. The next one is simply called random and is also quite similar to ramp up and ramp down. But instead of increasing or decreasing the pitch constantly, a random note from the current key is played back. The value keys set the range of notes that might be picked. The next step component controls the portamento. You can use it to apply a glide to single steps rather than to use the global glide feature. The higher you set this value, the longer will the glide take to reach the original pitch. If you set this to 9, the step will not have a glide. If you pick 0, one of the values will be picked randomly every time the step is triggered. The next step component is called sweep and is more or less an LFO. You can use it to apply a high or low pass filter sweep to your sound. You can also sweep through the available synth parameters or create a constant change of panning. Choose values 1 to 5 for a short sweep and 6 to 0 for a long one. The next step component is called tonality. It is used to replace the note in the selected step with another note in the current key. You can raise the pitch to 1 octave, a fifth or a third, above the original, or tune it a chromatic step up or down. If you save or change a chord progression in your master track, you can make the affected step ignore it by selecting value number 1. Value numbers 8 to 0 will quantize your chords to certain preset intervals. And the last step component is called jump, and what it does is jumping to a certain point in your sequence. For example, if you set the value for this step component to 1, it will jump back to the beginning of the sequence as soon as the affected step is triggered. You can also make it jump to any beat in a 4/4 timing, make it skip the next step, jump back one step which will cause a mini loop, jump to a random step, or stay on the affected step which will simply retrigger it infinitely. If you select value number 9, you realign the sequence with the other tracks. And now to the fun part. If you thought that it was complicated to this point, let me tell you, it will not get simpler. But it will get more awesome. Let me introduce to you the spark components. These step components are used to trigger parameters, components, or even steps in a pattern that you can define. All three of them follow the same logic. To demonstrate it, why don't you insert another snare hit into your pattern? Great. Now let's assume you want this step not to be triggered every bar but only every second. In this case, you can use the trigger spark. Apply it just as the other components to your step and select value number 2. Now the step will only be triggered every 2 bars. You can do the same for step components such as multiply. If you want this step component to affect the step only every 4th bar, apply the components bar to the step and select a value of 4. If you press the value key more than once, you can also change the bar in which the effect takes place. It is indicated by the blinking numbers. Cool. If you want the step to be played back with different parameters every once in a while, you can also use the parameter spark. First, change some parameters for the step like reverb and delay. Now apply parameters spark just as the other components to your step and select value number 8. Now the step will only be triggered every 2 bars, every 4 bars with the multiply component, and every 8 bars with the changed parameters. Congratulations! You made it through all punch-in effects and all step components. In case you can now remember all of them, also congratulations on being the reincarnation of Stephen Hawking. You have now learned all my basics. We are now ready to create beats that make the world a better place, melodies that bring peace to the people, and patterns that end all suffering in the universe. What are you waiting for? Let's go!